this is episode 3 of the Creative Content Studio podcast. So, hi Jim.
Hello there.
How are we?
Oh, I'm very good, thank you.
Good.
Not too bad yourself?
Excellent, yeah, not bad. Enjoying this glorious weather.
It's a sunny Sunday morning.
It's
as
lovely.
we talk to you.
It is, yeah. Ready
It should
to
be out on Monday.
release tomorrow. That's the idea.
Got our apprentice producer in.
We have, yeah. We have. He's doing a great job.
Our little boy Arthur.
Yeah.
6 years old.
Yeah,
he's working the camera switcher as we speak.
Yes, he's doing a great job. He's done the clapperboard. He's done some labelling for us this morning. Very important tasks.
Yeah.
As in his studio assistant role.
He's already better than me at this. He should be doing this bit, to be honest.
He's done his own podcast about trains.
And dinosaurs.
And dinosaurs.
He's had 2 shows.
He's an expert. He's an expert.
Excellent. What are we talking about today?
So, moving on from episode 2, where we were talking about what we were talking about in episode 2. Sorry, said that.
It was about formats, wasn't it?
Thank you. The different types of podcast formats,
yeah.
Pros and cons of each as well. So we're moving on now to niche. So finding your niche without getting boxed in.
Okay.
And
for people concerned at this point, we will get on to all the tech and the which
that's
mics,
episode 4.
which mics and stuff, because I think when you say like, we're going to help you start a podcast, I think the thing everyone's like, right, I need to get a mic.
Yeah.
Well, we're trying to build towards that. So
yeah, this is all the preparation. This is laying the foundations.
bear with us.
Yeah, we're getting to the gear. I think that's actually episode 4, so that will be next week.
Do the
anyway.
groundwork, and then you can get to the tech.
Exactly. So what advice would you give then to somebody who's looking to start a podcast, but they're trying to find their niche?
Yeah.
So, I mean, is it tricky?
It can be. I mean, it depends on your motivation for starting the podcast in the first place. I think that's the thing to bear in mind. If your motivation for starting the podcast in the first place was really clear, you had maybe a business objective, you wanted to talk about the particular business that you're in because it's quite niche in itself. You know, maybe it's something that not a lot of people know about. Maybe you're a desired client, don't necessarily know much about the inner workings of your business, and so you've already got a niche. Then great, it works out well, and I'd say lean into that, whatever that niche is. If your motivation though was, we talked about this on the format show last week, if your motivation was more like, we're really good fun as a group of friends and we should get in front of camera, it'll be great, then I think you need to work a little bit on what the specifics of that niche are. Is that niche, going back to last week, to do with the format itself? Is there a premise to the show? Like it could be there's some kind of quiz element to it, or some kind of mechanism that helps spark a conversation. It's a radio show, but I'll give you an example. Like Desert Island Discs is a premise. Again, I'm probably showing my age with that. I'm talking to Archers and Desert Island Discs in the last few episodes, so okay. Anyway, people get the premise. It's kind of, you're on a desert island and you have to pick some essential items to take with you and some great albums that mean something to you. And that kind of premise is to get the guest talking, ultimately, to give some structure to the show, to give familiarity to the listener base. And so if you don't have a niche as such, so there's nothing, not a business objective that you want to talk about or a hobby that you're really passionate about bringing to the world, but you've got that fun group that you want to get together, then maybe build it around some sort of mechanism or premise. That might really help. But it does help to define the format first, which is why we did that in episode 2, because that will tell you what kind of mechanism is going to work for you or not. Okay.
And do you have to be an expert if you do have a niche that you think, I need to talk more about this, I want to get this out into the world? Do you have to be like an expert in that field? Or is it something that you think kind of anyone can talk about anything?
Well, I mean, this is the day and age where sort of expertise is probably being rejected a little bit online and so on.
And also there are no rules.
And there are no rules.
That, so
I think, again, depends upon how you're framing it. If you're framing yourself as an expert and you're not, then I'd probably caution against that. If you're framing yourself as somebody who's taking an exploration into a subject and therefore you're going to learn along with the listener, then fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that at all. If I think back to my own show back in 2019 when I started it. It was a show based around veganism and the culture of veganism and me getting a wider understanding, really. And I wouldn't say I knew everything about that culture or that world. I still don't. You're still learning as you go.
Well, the premise of the show as well, like you said, was kind of exploratory. It was to find that out from people actually in different industries within the world of veganism and within that community, and then ended up building that network yourself and being involved in that community as a result. So
that's right.
It can lead you anywhere, I guess.
That's right. So if that's the premise that you've got, that you're going to learn with the audience, then you don't need to be an expert.
No, exactly.
It all just depends on how you position yourself.
Okay. And sort of classic mistakes do you think new podcasters might make when kind of choosing their niche and going for it, that you are aware of, you've seen, or you've experienced yourself maybe?
Classic mistakes probably are mismatching the premise and and their expertise, or the premise and their niche. So maybe the niche doesn't necessarily work for the premise that they've built, the mechanism that they've built. So it's really thinking about, do the two marry up? Does the premise help the content? I guess, does it help you bring the content to your listener? Does it help explain or explore your niche more? If that premise doesn't, then that's probably one of the kind of classic mistakes. And the biggest, I suppose, even bigger than that mistake, is not having a niche at all.
Right. Okay.
I think
you'd advise against that.
I think
not
it's
just like a general. I'm going to have a chat with someone.
I think you'll really
concept.
struggle to get a show off the ground if your show, in somewhere in the show bio, if it says exploring life, laughter, and everything, or whatever, those kind of
general.
Yeah, when people kind of go with that kind of, exploring all about this, that, the other, and beyond, those kind of words always say to me, are you clear on what this is about? All things such and such, like
all encompassing.
Yeah, when it's too wide, like
not specific enough.
Be specific. Yeah, be specific and be clear on what you want to talk about, because otherwise you won't be able to find the audience as easily. And I think sometimes we fall into this trap as sort of new podcasters because we see big shows doing it. We see celebrities doing it, and they can do it because their name is searchable and because people will find them and are comfortable listening to them talk about anything. So that's fine, but it doesn't work for me because people don't know who I am. So I need to have a niche that people can tap into and I can build a community around.
Okay. Obviously, maybe, talking again about your specific podcast, which was around veganism, which is sort of one of your passions, would you say, maybe? Yeah. How could people blend their passions to come up with like a unique show concept as well? Not necessarily something they're expert in or qualified in, but something that they're really passionate about, or more than one subject they're passionate about that they want to really talk, to other people about or get out into the world somehow.
Yeah, I think this is where the kind of the learning journey premise works really well, where someone's exploring a passion. I would actually sort of flip the question slightly and say, well, actually, it's not kind of how can you, it's you should be. That there should be something you're passionate about. If it's not something you're passionate about, you're going to struggle to really hone into the content that is worth listening and watching to. And
also that links to the sustainability element as well, doesn't it? Like if you're not passionate about it, then you're going to really struggle to keep going and keep recording those episodes, because if it's not something that you enjoy talking about, then releasing those episodes consistently is going to be a bit more of a struggle, right?
100%. You raise a good point generally about sustainability and the niche that you're picking. Is there enough legs in that niche in the first place? Thinking about it, how much have you got to say on this given subject? And that may make you go back and revisit the format, because it might actually be, I've got 10 episodes worth to talk about on this format, and no more. In which case, is the format is it maybe more suited to a limited series or a documentary style than it is a wider exploration. I'll give you a really sort of specific example of this. There's a show that I'm listening to at the moment, and it's not particularly consistently released. When it's released, it's very good, but it goes against the rules in terms of consistency of release. But it's called All the Way Through. Little catchy pun there in the title. And it's essentially two folks, they're journalists, I believe, by trade, and they are rewatching all of Louis Theroux's output over the course of years that he's been doing. So not just
podcasts, but his documentaries as well?
All his documentaries. So they've started with Weird Weekends, I think, so they haven't gone back to the stuff that he was doing with Michael Moore back in the States and stuff before he had his own shows, but they've gone from his own shows, so Weird Weekends and beyond. They're watching every episode, and then the premise is they sort of unpack the episode. They then find interviewees who are people who were on the episodes and stuff. So if it was, I don't know, Louis in the mega jail or something like that, they have found one of the prison officers and they've interviewed them sort of 20 years later and, you know, what did you do next and that kind of stuff. And then they end up the show, the premise of the show is they then rate it, whether it was good Louis or bad Louis.
Oh, okay.
So they sort of decide.
Is that it? They don't talk around it that much?
Oh, they talk around it first and they sort of talk about the merits of it and whether, you know, they talk about it in, it's actually quite interesting because they talk about it from a 2025 kind of audience perspective.
Right.
Whether some of it lands or not, or whether it still resonates and that sort of stuff. And then they round it all up with this kind of good Louis, bad Louis premise. They've actually had Louis Theroux on the show.
I'm sure they have.
Which is quite amazing that they got him so early.
But they don't consistently release this, though?
No, it's not. It's not
like
consistently
have time.
Released at all. It's completely random. So it doesn't follow any rules. But the point that I was making, it wasn't just a plug for All the Way Through. there was a point to my bringing this show up, is that they're really clear on how long that show's going to last.
Because there's a finite amount of work that Louis Theroux's done, first
Exactly.
off, surely. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
So they've got, I don't know what it is, 50 hours worth of TV to watch. And so they've probably got 50 odd episodes in it. And then after that, that'll be that. You know, there's another one called Office Ladies, which is two cast members from the US office, going through every episode. Again, it's really limited. So those are two examples based on TV shows, but you might have a subject that you think I've probably got 10 episodes in this, in which case that's fine, but just again be clear on the format, you know.
And how can you avoid like boxing yourself in and leave room to then grow as well? So we've talked about, you know, depending on if there's a finite amount of material that you can work from, you might only have like potentially like a podumentary or like a limited number of episodes you could release on that topic. So how do you maybe talk about your passion and some sort of niche, but also not limit it, if that makes sense? How can you grow on that if you want to keep recording? Like, you know, do you see what I'm trying to say?
yeah.
I'm not wording
I think so.
very
like,
well.
How do you keep it growing when it might have a limited
life?
it
might be quite specific.
Yeah. Well, I think, do you need to, I suppose? You
have to ask yourself that question.
I think that's the first thing. Does everything need to last forever? Does every podcast need to be something that you're going to do for the rest of your life, you know, or is it actually this is a limited series? If it is a limited series, then that's great. If it's not, and you do think there is more mileage in it, then by all means you can start to evolve the content. You know, is there a subject adjacent to that that you can explore? You know, so if you're talking about a TV show, for example, is it that the work of some of the people that were in it, or perhaps there's some spin-off shows or those kind of things. So I think about a show that I listened to by a couple of guys talking about Breaking Bad back in the day, and I listened to this quite a few years back, but they obviously had a limited time, and then they went into spin-offs, and then they started to look at Vince Gilligan's other work, and then eventually they spun that off into looking at other TV shows. They've actually got quite a successful network of podcasts now, and they're professional, you know, that's their job, and they rate and review TV shows, and so they sort of said, okay, well, this worked for that show, so let's make one now about Game of Thrones. So they spun it off in the first instance, and then once they'd spun it off, they said, actually, the thing we enjoy is talking about TV shows. Let's talk about other TV shows. I
guess things can evolve like that as well, can't they, as you go? You might not expect it when you start out, but maybe something that happens in an episode, or something that or something that a guest brings to the table that you think, oh, okay, that might actually could be like a spin-off of this. Then Yeah, I suppose you have to be just open to that. But like you say, at the same time, know when to stop. If it's meant to be 10 episodes, then leave it at that. Keep it short and sweet.
Yeah, know when to stop. I mean, with my show personally, I've done 200 episodes, and I've essentially handed it over to somebody else at the moment, and they're doing the interviews for me going forward. And that's because I felt like at this point in my life, I'm not sure I have much more to explore on that subject. Not because I've learnt it all, nothing like that, but more because I think my energy on that subject is probably at a point where it needs to pause and recharge. In terms of bringing that conversation to, I'm still passionate about the subject, but in terms of bringing that conversation to an audience, my energy is probably at a point where it's time for somebody else to bring a fresh perspective to it. So knowing when to end is a great gift in anything, you know.
Just as important as knowing when to begin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I keep talking about TV today. I must be on my mind, but I think there's some really good parallels here. You know, not every TV show lasts forever.
Yeah.
You know, some of the best TV shows in history have been 2 seasons long, and then they might have done a Christmas special, and then they finished because that was the story they had to tell. You know, so in podcasting, it might be similar. That might be the content that you want to finish with. However, if you're talking about something like news, you're talking about something like sport, you're talking about reviewing something wider, you're talking about your own business, then that might be evergreen. You could keep going with that for as long as you've got the energy to do it. And it can evolve with you as you see fit, as long as you take your audience with you.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. Love it. Some great advice there. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Next episode, like we kind of touched upon earlier, is going to be around gear. Like when you're starting out, some great hints and tips on what sort of gear is recommended, sort of price points, budget, things to take into consideration to get started if you don't have a studio available to you like we do.
As a massive nerd,
you're going to love this episode.
This is the bit.
We're going to have to try and keep this quite concise, I think. I feel like it's going to be like an hour and a half.
You're going to have to try and stop me saying model numbers.
Well, that's fine, because I think that might be quite useful, because people could just like Google them afterwards.
I don't think people want to hear me rattle off microphone model numbers.
Maybe,
I don't know.
Just the odd thing. Maybe
We'll keep it short and brief, but give you the pertinent information, and then the show notes will be there to help you.
There you go.
We should say as well, and I will say this again next week, but nothing we mention in this space or in any other episode is about affiliate links. We're not trying to sell you specific microphones.
No.
I think it's a really key thing for us, that what we don't want to do is sell you some gear or tell you to go and buy some equipment that isn't the right stuff. So
it needs to work for you.
Yeah.
It needs to fit budgets and you know, tech expertise and all sorts of other things, which we'll cover. But yeah, you're right. We're just basically talking about from experience, from your experience, what you've used, what you know other people have used, what we use currently, and what works and what doesn't.
There's a lot of folks out there trying to sell you certain mics because they get a kickback on the affiliate links. So we're not trying to do that. We're not trying to do that. Anyway, that's for next week.
Yeah.
Thank you to our producer. Excellent work over there. He's giving us a wave.
Thumbs up. Thanks, dude.
Thanks, Kate, for the questions.
Thank you, Jim.
Apologies for my rambling again.
No rambling at all.
Wonderful. In that case,
see you next time.
What was the thing I said last week?
See you next time.
See you next time.